Hello, welcome back to Understanding Iron Deficiency, a complete guide. Today we're talking about anemia and fatigue. So we're going to be going over what hemoglobin is. That's what we're measuring when we're testing for anemia. We're going to be talking about the fact that there are many different types of anemia. We're going to be talking about why anemia makes you so tired and fatigued. And then we're going to be talking about the nuances of iron deficiency with or without anemia. Okay? So, what is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is a protein and it's in red blood cells, and there are about 300 million hemoglobin molecules per red blood cell. So, there's a lot. Uh, a hemoglobin molecule has a lifespan of about 120 days. So they're getting recycled, right? You're constantly making more hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is dying off and getting recycled. So each hemoglobin molecule has 4 heme groups, and each heme group holds 1 iron atom. So there are 4 iron atoms per hemoglobin molecule. That means that you can carry 4 oxygen molecules because each iron molecule helps to carry, each iron atom helps to carry 1 oxygen molecule. And in an oxygen molecule, O2, there are 2 oxygen atoms, so 8 oxygen atoms, 4 oxygen molecules. And hemoglobin is what gives your red blood cells their bright red color when they're oxygenated, right? So when the hemoglobin is fully loaded with oxygen, it is bright red, just like fresh beef. And then when it is not carrying any oxygen, it gets darker and not so bright. Okay. There are various factors that can affect hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen molecule. So hemoglobin is a valuable molecule because it has this affinity for oxygen, but it's a very delicate balance because it has to have the right affinity to attract oxygen in the lungs to itself into the blood, but then it also has to have not so strong of an affinity that it can give up the oxygen when it gets to the tissues that need the oxygen, right? And it really is quite beautiful how it works. One of the big ones here is pH, and it's so fascinating because pH in your blood, it's largely affected by carbon dioxide and lactic acid. So let's just look at carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide breaks down into carbonic acid, so it's acidic, which means that it lowers pH. Okay, so at the lungs, when you are exhaling pH, you are ridding yourself of pH, which is acidic, raising that pH. Okay, you're ridding yourself of carbon dioxide, raising your pH. And as the pH raises, that increases hemoglobin's affinity to oxygen. And so hemoglobin at the lungs jumps over, into the bloodstream, into the hemoglobin molecule. And once the hemoglobin molecule gets 1 oxygen, it kind of opens up a little bit. And then the other 3 oxygen molecules more easily get into it and load on. And then it goes down to the tissues eventually, right through past the heart, down through the tissues, through the bloodstream to the tissues. And the beautiful thing is here that when the pH gets lower, that decreases hemoglobin's affinity to oxygen. When it gets more acidic, when things get sour, they don't love each other so much, right? When things get sour. So because the cells are producing a lot of carbon dioxide and perhaps lactic acid as metabolic byproducts, the pH is lower at the cells and it's lower at the tissues that need it most. So this is how oxygen is delivered to the tissues. This is how oxygen is delivered most expediently to the tissues that need it most, right? And yeah, it really is beautiful. You can learn about the Bohr effect, which we'll be learning about later, actually, to really understand that how pH affects the affinity between hemoglobin and oxygen. But similarly to pH, temperature can change this, right? So heat would decrease it, right? Which is perfect because if you're, let's say your muscles are working hard, for example, they're producing more heat and they're going to get more oxygen delivered there. Oxygen is going to have an easier time leaving its hemoglobin molecule. Um, there are different types of hemoglobin molecules. We already mentioned there is fetal hemoglobin, which has a higher affinity for oxygen, and then there's adult hemoglobin. And we'll talk more when we talk about anemia. There's different ways that hemoglobin can be affected so that it has a worse affinity and it doesn't quite gather oxygen molecules very well. Another thing is that your body can use 2,3 BPG. You don't need to know what it is. Personally, I've forgotten what it is, but I know what it is. I just forget its name. Who cares? 2,3 BPG basically temporarily, well, it can kind of more, if you need it, it can alter the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen um, in a way to make hemoglobin hold on to oxygen more tightly, right? And less willing to let it go. So increase the affinity, right? So those are a few things. And yeah, that's enough of that. So beyond iron deficiency anemia, there are many other types of anemias. Just to go over some of the more common ones, megaloblastic anemia is typically from a B12 or a folate deficiency, and that's where you're just going to have larger than normal A hemoglobin, and it doesn't function as well. A lot of these have to do with the structure of the hemoglobin changing, and often the structure of the hemoglobin changing then changes the structure of the red blood cells, and then the red blood cells can't operate properly and flow through the blood as well too. Aplastic anemia, that's when the bone marrow just doesn't produce enough red blood cells. Hemolytic anemia is when many of your red blood cells are destroyed because of toxins in the blood. It can be from other things other than toxins, but we'll just leave it at that. Sickle cell anemia, this is one of those where the structure of the hemoglobin is slightly changed, and because of that, the hemoglobin within the red blood cells are more likely to clump together, and because of that, the red blood cell, instead of being round with the hemoglobin spread out, because the hemoglobins are kind of clumped together, it pulls in the borders and the membranes of the red blood cell so that it's more sickle shaped, right? And it's not nice and round, so it's sickle shaped, and then it doesn't flow through the blood well, and it doesn't carry oxygen as well because the hemoglobin is not structured properly. Um, with sickle cell anemia, it typically um, is worsened after a state of oxygen deprivation. So if somebody has it, they might be fine, but then if they get oxygen, they experience oxygen deprivation, then it kind of gets activated in a way. Uh, Thalassemia is a genetic condition that impairs the production of the alpha and beta chains on the hemoglobin molecule. And basically, that just ends up you have pale, small, fragile, and irregularly shaped red blood cells. Anemia of kidney disease. So, if you have kidney disease, then your kidneys aren't functioning as well. And because your kidneys excrete erythropoietin, which is the hormone that travels to the bone marrow to signal for your bone marrow to produce red blood cells. Your kidneys aren't producing enough erythropoietin, and because of that, then you just don't end up with enough red blood cells. And again, there are many more types of anemia, but these are just some of the most common ones. So why, when somebody has anemia, why are they so darn tired all the time? Okay. It stems from a lack of systemic oxygen delivery, right? So as we've discussed, oxygen is by far the most important nutrient. It is critical for energy metabolism. Every single cell, when it is using aerobic metabolism, which it definitely prefers to use, right, over anaerobic metabolism, it is using that oxygen to produce ATP, right? It needs oxygen, right? You can only do anaerobic metabolism so much. Anaerobic metabolism also produces a lot of metabolic byproducts. It is much less efficient. Okay, so oxygen is just so critical for energy. You're going to be tired no matter what type of anemia you have, right? So whether it's iron deficiency anemia or sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, all the ones that we talked about, they're all going to cause that same fatigue because you're lacking that systemic oxygen delivery. And fatigue, we think of it as a body thing, as a muscular thing, but it's quite clear it also affects the brain too, right? People with fatigue, if you've ever experienced it, I have. It's awful. You go up a flight of stairs and you're tired. It's terrible. But it's not just your body that is suffering. Your brain is suffering. All of your organs are suffering, especially the ones that have high oxygen demands, high metabolic rates, such as the kidneys, the liver. They all suffer because they're not getting the oxygen that they need. So oxygen, again, oxygen is at the root of it. And so it's not just a body problem, it's also a brain problem. That's why you're not just fatigued, but you also have a poor mood, makes you irritable, right? So you can have iron deficiency with anemia and without anemia, right? So you can have iron deficiency and you have low hemoglobin levels because of that. You can also have low iron levels and not have anemia, right? What I want to emphasize is that both are problematic. Both are very bad. You don't want to just worry about it once you have anemia. You know, by the time you have anemia, that's when things are really bad if you have iron deficiency anemia. Um, so, and the other thing is here that a lot of the symptoms of anemia, they're still present even if you're not technically anemic by by measuring hemoglobin. Right? So even if you don't have an anemia diagnosis, you might still be really pale. You might still be really tired. You might still have a really low mood. You're going to struggle with the exact same things, um, because iron is needed for oxygen supply in other ways, such as myoglobin. But yeah, it's going to happen, right? It's only when you're severely iron deficient that you become anemic as well. And a good way to think about it is thinking about how you have a bank and you also have a wallet. Okay. So iron storage, which is stored in ferritin, you can kind of think of it as your bank, right? You can kind of think of iron and hemoglobin as money in your wallet, right? And when you're using your money, you do not put all of it into your wallet. You have most of it in your bank, right? But you always want some of it in your wallet, right? And if you have a lot of money, you know, you probably still keep a normal amount of it in your wallet, right? And this is the way that it works in the body. If you have perfectly good ferritin levels, you're not going to have super high hemoglobin levels. You're going to have normal, good hemoglobin levels, right? You keep a normal amount in your wallet. And then, but as you get less and less iron stored, if you have less ferritin, which is a measurement for iron storage, your body is still going to make sure that it keeps enough iron in its wallet, right? So even though you're poor in terms of looking at your bank account, your body, because hemoglobin is so important, your body makes sure until the end that it has enough iron to put into hemoglobin production, right? It does start to wane, you know, as you get more and more iron deficient, but your body will really try to make sure it has enough hemoglobin. And so it's not until you're just dead broke that you really, you stop carrying so much in your wallet, right? You start realizing that you're only carrying, you know, $10 in your wallet instead of the normal hemoglobin levels of 13, 14, 15, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe I just confused you, but I don't know. Okay, so if I confuse you, to be clear, right, you can have anemia without iron deficiency. Okay, so these are things like uh, thalassemia. These are things like sickle cell anemia, right? You can have anemia without iron deficiency. You can also have iron deficiency but not have anemia, right? Both of these are still problems, right? If you have anemia without iron deficiency, you need to get that solved. If you have iron deficiency without anemia, you need to get that solved. You can also have iron deficiency with anemia. You definitely need to get that solved, okay? And then what we're aiming for, what we all want is to have neither iron deficiency nor anemia, right? So if you are iron deficient, uh, or sorry, if you have anemia without iron deficiency, you might actually still benefit from iron because, well, I mean, you're probably also a little bit iron deficient too, and it's just not, it's just not recognized. But anyway, just making sure that you have enough iron for the red blood cells and the hemoglobin that you do have to have that iron, right? Yeah, if you have iron deficiency without anemia, still very bad. You definitely want to get that checked out. And then if you have both, that's usually indicative of a severe iron deficiency. Your ferritin is probably very low. Okay. So number 4 is what we want. Neither of them. Okay. Up next, we're going to be talking about sleep issues. Okay. So a lot of people with iron deficiency, they have trouble sleeping. They might not be able to fall asleep. They wake up frequently in the night. They sleep 10 hours, but they still feel exhausted. Why is this happening? We're also going to be talking about nightmares and sleep paralysis, which is very interesting. Okay. So I hope that you watch that video. If you've been liking this, please like, please subscribe. Thanks.